Which is the best pagan religion in Crusader Kings 3? There are 23 pagan religions as classified by the game, with a massive amount of variance in between them. To determine which is best, I'll be ranking each paganism on a tier list from S to F based on the strength of their mechanics. Also, like and subscribe so that I can afford a haircut. We start with Asatru, which goes straight to S tier. The Warmonger tenant is excellent as it gives you bonus cast a spell as and gets rid of the negative opinion modifier for your vassals when you're at war. As well, it gives you access to great holy wars once you reform the faith. Blot is good as executions give you an easy way to get some extra piety, and then Patron Gods is honestly not the best as its bonuses are kind of mediocre. This religion also has Revocable Realm Priest, which is good, and it has Polygamy, which is good as many children is good for a wide game. One of the only bad things is that its holy sites are a bit weirdly spaced, but it's not the worst. Next up in C tier we have Kaerweborn. Apologies in advance for these pronunciations. Human Sacrifice is good as it's just the same as Blot. Esotericism is good because it allows you to get the Wise Man trait easier, which in turn allows you to take the Hold Mystical Communion decision, which is pretty nice. And then Ritual Celebrations is good because it unlocks the Brewery's line of buildings. We've also got Revocable Priests, Witchcraft Accepted, and Concubines. All in all, this isn't the strongest religion, but it's not bad either. Its cluster of holy sites is relatively good. Gairbon goes into D tier because I think swapping esotericism and human sacrifices for Eastern syncretism and monasticism is just slightly worse than the other religion. Holy site distribution is unchanged, however. Siguism goes into C tier. Its three traits are relatively good. Adaptive helps you avoid rebellions. Ancestor worship gives you bonuses to prestige. And then Sanctity of Nature is where this religion falls down. As well, it offers bonuses to fighting in forests and jungles. The area this religion is located actually has very few forests and jungles. It's mostly dry lands. Witchcraft being a virtue is fun though. Bideism goes into B tier as it's just a slightly better Siguism. Sanctity of Nature being replaced by human sacrifices. Next, Volapixi goes into E tier. Honestly, I was tempted to put this faith into F, but it's got sort of two saving graces. One is that its holy sites are clustered together. You'll notice that they're right up against the edge of the map, which is bad, but considering that the entire map of CK3 is about to be expanded, I didn't think that was going to be an issue. Other than holy site placement though, this religion is shockingly terrible. It actually has more sins than virtues, and among those sins are both greedy and ambitious, two very powerful traits. Communal identity is only ever good if you're going through a wide playthrough, but I guess in this instance you kinda have to, so it's not that bad. Aestheticism is awful because it adds 3 sins and only 1 virtue, and then Sanctity of Nature is just absolutely ridiculous. Whereas that other religion at least had a bit of forest near it, this religion actually has no forest near it at all. No jungle, no nothing, it's just mountains and hills, it's ridiculous. On to a religion within the same religious family, Meli, which actually goes into B tier. Astrology is pretty good, as well it seems like it may only offer bonus naval speed. What it actually allows you to do is to divine the stars, which can give you bonus lifestyle experience, one of the most important aspects of Crusader Kings 3. Ancestor worship is just some bonus prestige, as we've covered before, and then ritual celebrations give you access to the Brewery's line of buildings. The holy site placement is a relatively good cluster, and being at the edge of the map doesn't matter as the map is about to be expanded. Now to Donji Paloism in C tier. Religious law is an interesting tenet as it actually makes it advantageous for there to be more sins in your religion, as it means you can condemn sinful vassals, allowing you to steal their titles with impunity. Ancestor worship is fine as discussed, and here we have a rare instance where Sanctity of Nature is actually helpful. There's actually a rather large jungle just to the south where this religion has its holy sites, so that's pretty good. Sedism also goes into C tier. It's just a slightly different version of the previous religion, with Inner Journey not being the most consequential swap out. Keratism goes in E. Ancestor worship is fine, as been said. Reincarnation, however, is not fine. It's actually quite bad in that it doesn't do anything at all. Its bonuses are negligible. The thing about Eastern syncretism is, while it does allow this religion to survive in its environment, considering it's surrounded by Eastern religions, it's also not a very strong tenet. It's sort of the absence of a tenet. It doesn't really do much other than let it survive in its area. You might as well play as an Eastern religion. Next up, Umaism goes into D tier. Possessing the ritual celebrations tenet instead of reincarnation, this religion is just a slightly better version than the previous one. To note, both these religions have pretty good clusters with regards to their holy sites, so that's also to their benefit. Now to a different religious subtype, Bori goes into B tier. Esotericism is quite good, as I've said before, as the wise man trait is desirable. The learning lifestyle in general is pretty awesome. Adoricism is an interesting tenet in that it makes possessed a virtue. This trait is pretty good, as while it gives a moderate health penalty, it also gives 10% lifestyle experience. Ritual celebrations is good, as been discussed before. And another fun bonus, witchcraft is virtuous in this religion. And again, a fine holy site dispersal. Now on to Tengriism, which goes into S tier. The Warmonger tenet lets you conquer the map with ease. The Esotericism tenet makes it much easier to get the Wise Man trait, a trait that gives you incredible XP gains when going down the learning lifestyle, one of the strongest lifestyles in the game. Ancestor worship is also an okay tenet, as discussed before. Having revocable realm priests and concubines, this religion is actually quite similar to Asatru and is only slightly different. Do be aware that the holy sites are quite far from each other, however. Ukanusko goes into D tier. I originally placed Ukanusko into D tier because it has two traits that I think are rather mediocre, those being communal identity and ancestor worship, though I am willing to have my mind changed about them as I realized their third ability, Sanctity of Nature, could actually be quite strong in this instance. Combined with the benefits of the Akal Holy Site that give bonus battle rolls in Tundra, and considering that most of the Okanusko territory is Tundra, they could be quite strong situationally, so I put them in D tier only tentatively. Slovianska Pravda goes into D tier. Being possessed of both communal identity and sanctity of nature, this faith is quite similar to Okanusko, except that it has ritual celebrations. I'm less inclined to give this faith a second chance, mainly due to the very weird placement of its holy sites. Turumism goes into C tier. While it may look like just a combination of the previous two faiths, being possessed of ancestor worship, ritualistic celebrations, and sanctity of nature, this faith is special in that both hunters and witches are virtuous. Both the hunter trait and the witch trait are quite easy to get, which means there's a great potential for earning a lot of piety here. Sanctity of Nature is also not useless here, as the holy sites are located in the taiga. Now our first faith onto F tier is Wakism, which is quite a shame as it's one of my favorite symbols. The trouble with this faith is that its three traits are all kind of bad. I am not a fan of communal identity, as I've said. Sacred childbirth doesn't really do much, as people don't really die in pregnancy that often, oddly enough. And then there's another instance of Sanctity of Nature being completely useless, as there's just one tiny spot of forest in this entire land where the holy sites are, so it is not going to be helpful. An interesting quirk of this faith, however, is that pregnant is a virtue. Orisa goes into C tier. It's got Esotericism, which is a really good trait. It's got Reincarnation, which is a trait that's kind of bad. And then it's got Ancestor Worship, which is just okay. Its holy site placement is really good, as the holy sites are all right next to each other. Akam goes into C tier. The Adorcism trait is good as it makes it easier to get possessed, and makes the possessed trait a virtue worth 2 piety. This trait is pretty good, as well it gives a moderate health penalty. It also gives 10% lifestyle experience. Ancestor worship is fine, of course, and then ritual celebrations is good because of the breweries line of buildings. I'm not sure if I've mentioned yet, but the breweries are good because they give bonuses to development, which is extremely important. The holy site dispersal here is also rather nice. Vitalism goes into E tier. You'll notice that one of its traits is just a renamed sacred childbirth, and this is actually just a slightly better version of Wakism. Kushite goes into A tier. Having esotericism is great, but what really sets this faith apart is this strange tenet here, which gives a negative 50% to short reign duration. Half the short reign duration is half the amount of time spent dealing with rebellions and peasants. Ancestor worship is fine, again. Something you may have noticed is that most of the pagan religions we've covered have had a pluralist religious stance. This can be good in some instances, but makes holy wars less impactful. Unlike most other faiths covered here, Kushite has the righteous religious stance. As well, they've got a pretty good holy site cluster. And lastly, I think the fact that this religion worships the ancient Egyptian gods has got to count for something. I mean, that's pretty neat. Rugsen goes into D tier. This faith has 2 religious tenets I consider to be mediocre, those being communal identity and reincarnation, and a third trait that's fine. The reason I don't put this faith into E tier is because it's got a pretty good holy site cluster, and witchcraft is virtuous. Tautosism goes into B tier. Tautosists have a very special religious trait known as auspicious birthright. Similar to esotericism, this trait gives your children the chance to become wise men, but this time it's much more rare, except instead of wise man being a virtue worth 1 piety, here it's a virtue worth 5 piety, and it gives you plus 50 clergy opinion. Astrology is great, as I've mentioned, and ancestor worship is nice. I was tempted to put this faith into A tier, though its very far apart holy sites made me reconsider. Paganism goes into S tier. Based in the Canary Islands, this faith has some truly insane modifiers. Megalithic constructions gives bonus gold, development, levies, and battle advantage in hills. Volcanic veneration gives many bonuses to spreading the faith and to combat in mountains. Sacrificial ceremonies is a combination of the Kushite ritual suicide tenet as well as the human sacrifice tenet, but it takes the best elements of both. The holy site in Mount Tide gives an additional 25% development in hills, which means that in hilly terrain you'll be at plus 35% development. If you're looking for an incredible tall game, try Paganism on the Canary Islands. The only downside to this faith is that it's got a truly bizarre holy site placement, with one of the holy sites being in Alexandria, though considering that all these holy sites are coastal, it shouldn't be too difficult to reach each one of them. Era Zaharak goes into C tier. You may be surprised that I've placed this religion into C tier, as I'm not a huge fan of the communal identity tenet, nor the syncretism tenets. One reason is that chthonic redoubts is a very good trait. However, the true reason I put this faith into C tier is because of two of its very good holy sites. Plus 8 coastal advantage in Viscaya and plus 50% control growth in Bordeaux are very massive changes. Whereas typically holy site bonuses are like this one, which gives you 0.03 per night, that is to say, rather inconsequential, these two are actually quite strong. This plus chthonic redoubts has boosted this faith out of D tier. Hellenism goes into B tier. Esotericism and astrology are awesome, as has been said. The plus 10% development growth from Rome is pretty nice. And where usually I'm opposed to communal identity, here I can actually see how it would be very useful. If you're becoming Hellenic through restoring the Roman Empire by using the Roads to Power DLC decision, vast portions of your mostly Greek Empire will remain Orthodox, and so communal identity will help you convert those counties into Hellenic. Rome is no doubt a wide empire, and being able to spread your culture across a wide empire can be good, as you can get cultural traits such as loyal vassals which make rebellions less likely. So yes, fair play to the communal identity enjoyers, I just think that Tall is generally stronger. Next, Zunism goes into D tier. While this is certainly one of the most fun faiths to play and revive, I don't think its actual traits are the strongest. Sun Trials makes it so that feasts give you bonus piety and you have access to a special execution method. Unrelenting Faith gives you bonus combat against hostile faiths, though interesting this one has a pluralist attitude. And then I don't like the syncretist traits, as I think they just occupy a trait slot. Interestingly, this faith has 2 holy sites that both give you 1 stewardship per level of devotion, though one of them is in Alexandria, away from all the others. The last pagan faith on our list is simply called Paganism, and it goes into C tier. Astrology is lovely, ancestor worship is fine, sanctity of nature is less lovely. I must say, of all the faiths on our list, this one has the most truly baffling holy site placement. Look at this, they're spread across the entire map. How are you ever going to get 3 of these? It's completely insane. Okay, this is the completed list, but which one of these faiths is truly the best? It's Paganism. While both Norse and Tengri are made excellent by the Warmonger trait, plus 35% development is just too good to overlook. Both Norse and Tengri can make you an incredibly wide empire, but as technology advances, you'll find that you have not so many troops as like a duke in Italy. Whereas with Paganism, you'll find that as a tiny duchy, the Canary Islands, you'll have more troops and gold than some kingdoms. Thus, I must declare Paganism the best pagan religion.